Hey everybody, Yankee here. The Founding Fathers, would they have written the Second Amendment the way they did, or at all, if they could have possibly foreseen how efficient and deadly modern weaponry would have become? A lot of people ask that question all the time. They seem to think that if the Founding Fathers could have foreseen this, that people could cause mass damage with weapons that were available to them, they would have never agreed that people should have them. Because it's not worth someone having self-defense abilities if they can just go out and kill numerous people. And there's no way the founders could have foreseen that. Well, that is a flawed question and a flawed position. It's flawed in many ways. First off, it's when people say, all they had was single-load muzzle loaders. They didn't even know about guns like revolvers even, much less semi-automatics or fully automatics. That's not true at all. Back in the day, there was lots of weaponry that was way more efficient than a muzzle loader. It's just that was the common weapon for an infantryman, something they could carry with them. But things that a lot of people would consider like Gatling guns, machine guns, those were actually invented decades before the Revolutionary War. Mortars were invented centuries before the Revolutionary War. Cannons, all kinds of things like that. Bombs. Heck, the average farmer, from stuff they could get readily, during the time of the founders, could make a bomb that could blow up a building. Easy. They would blow tree stumps out of the ground. That takes quite an explosion. So they had that capability then. The Founding Fathers knew there were weapons of mass destruction, and they knew people could misuse them. They just trusted most people not to. So they wrote the Second Amendment the way they did, and they weren't stupid people. They knew there was going to be an evolution in weapons, even from what they knew of. They knew they were going to get more efficient, just like they knew people eventually would be able to communicate better. They even had some of that stuff in their writings, how the printing press and newspapers and rising literacy rates were going to increase communications between people. They weren't stupid. They were smart as you and me. Smarter than most of us, actually. They just didn't have as advanced technology, but they could see it coming. They could look into the future. And like I said, this whole notion that all they knew were single-shot muskets, that's garbage that you're being fed by morons who like to make a point but can't make the point using real facts. So they have to pretend, because the founders knew things like that. They knew that weaponry was going to advance. They also knew weapons of mass destruction existed at the time. Imagine one of those bombs that a farmer could build to blow a tree stump out of the ground. Imagine if they took that and tossed it into the window of a school building. They could cause a lot of damage. It's just that the founders didn't think you punished everybody because of what a few people might do. And they knew there were very good reasons for the Second Amendment to exist, just like there was the First Amendment. In fact, the Second Amendment kind of protects the First Amendment, which is our most important right. That and Fifth and, all kinds of other ones, but the first is the most important and the second is almost the most important one because it defends the most important one. And the founders knew that. So yes, they would still have written the Second Amendment the way they did, even if they could foresee what weapons would become. Because, to be honest, what you and I can get a hold of now really isn't much more dangerous than what they could get a hold of back then. And they could foresee advancement. Plus, that whole notion that it wouldn't be worth it just for one person to have self-defense, for them to have a weapon of mass destruction. Well, that's not what the Second Amendment is about. And the founders didn't write the Second Amendment so that you could defend yourself when you go out to Coachella or something. They wrote it so the populace could fight back against a corrupt government. So that you, the people, could be armed well enough to fight a corrupt government. So even if what they had at the time had just been single-loading muzzle loaders or single-shot guns, that's what they wanted the people to have. If they knew that the government had more, they'd want the people to have more because they want the people to be on equal footing with the government. Now, is it going to be possible that we're on total equal footing? Well, no, because most of us just can't afford a fighter jet. Most of us can't afford, tanks. But the Founding Fathers, if our government was going to build up all that stuff, they would want, probably, I would say, based on their own writings, they would want the people to have access to that too, through a militia. And anything that an individual soldier could carry, they would want us to have, in case it was a ground war. individual against individual, because the Second Amendment is about fighting back against your own government or foreign governments or foreign powers that would threaten our union. That's what it's about. It's not about self-defense. That's a byproduct. They knew people needed firearms for self-defense, for hunting and other things. They didn't say because people need to hunt and defend themselves, etc. They said because people may need to band together and defend against a power, foreign or domestic, that seek to end our way of life, that the right to keep and bear arms should not be infringed. And they knew that arms didn't just mean muskets. That is the biggest lie the anti-gunners like to tell. They knew better. And not giving them enough credit to think that they could look forward and know things are going to advance because they've seen advancement and things were far more advanced than people like to think anyway. That's kind of selling them short. I hate that argument because it pretends like the Founding Fathers were just these stupid yokels that didn't know nothing. They didn't know how things were going to go. In fact, they knew how things were going to go. They predicted it. They said eventually we'll probably turn over our government to the wealthy and big corporations, which is what we've been doing. They said that we would allow government to be influenced by religion, which is what a lot of people want to do. How many people every day do you say, oh, I want religion back in schools. I want religion back in government. Well, the Founding Fathers didn't want that for a reason. Just like they wanted the Second Amendment there for a reason and free speech there for a reason. And it wasn't because they were a bunch of yokels that didn't see what could become of that. It's because they knew that was essential to try to prevent all these other things that they had warned people about. So yes, the Founding Fathers, I think they would have still written the Second Amendment just the way they did, even if they knew what was going to happen in the future. If they had known for sure what weapons were going to become. I think they would have been even more fervent about what they wrote. And they would have written even more to keep power in the hands of the people because they really worried about the government being taken over by big money interests, by corporations, because they'd seen that in England. They'd seen the church take control of government in England. They didn't want that happening here. Those are the things I think they would see in the future. If they looked into the future and they saw, AR-15s and M16s and anything like that, they wouldn't panic about that stuff. They'd panic about the other things, and they would hope that citizens had more of that stuff. If you actually knew anything about the founders and what they wanted for government. So that whole notion that the Founding Fathers wouldn't have written it the way they did if they'd have seen what was coming, I think they would have written it to where it was even more enforcing people having firearms and people being able to defend against the government because they would have seen a government going the wrong direction. And this whole notion that they were stupid and didn't know this stuff, there were weapons of mass destruction back then. Like I said, bombs, mortars, etc., cannons. There were all types of firearms that were way more efficient than, there was a revolving rifle that was like a Gatling gun. There was all kinds of stuff. Look it up. Do some research. Look back into the 1400s and see some of the stuff they were using then and tell me there were no weapons of mass destruction. The founders knew that, and they knew it was even going to get more so because everything was evolving. Everything was advancing, technology, etc. They were seeing it with their own eyes. They were smart enough to know what that meant. So yes, they would have written it, even if they saw the things that had come about today. Like I said, I think they would have been even more adamant about us having even better weapons because a lot of the things they were worried about seems to be happening today. So I think they would want to make sure that we, the people, could fight against that and try to take this country back.
And